Hey Stacy, thank you so much for having us today and for your time as well. Um, I wanted to ask you, what do you think the role of faculty should be on our college campus for students with disabilities?
I think faculty play an important role for students with disabilities. I studied the principles of universal design, which were founded at North Carolina State by Ronald Mace. I'm sure you too have found those as you've done this research. And so I think that's an important piece that faculty can use. I think the principles of universal design have applications beyond just architecture and facilities and can be applied to a student's entire experience. And so if faculty members design their course curriculum and assignments and projects with those principles in mind so that every student can participate to the full extent possible. Having options for students who maybe have physical disabilities or using adaptive software when necessary, then everybody's invested and everybody has the same opportunity in the classroom.
Great. One thing that came to our mind was, as the director of housing, how do you think the enrollment process for students with disabilities differs or overlaps with how their housing should be on campus in regards to like commodities for them?
Sure. Currently, students fill out a special needs housing application, and that applies not only to housing anymore. It used to just be housing, but now it also applies to classrooms, parking permits, meal plans, anything in which a student could need a special accommodation. We've really centralized that process to make it easier for students and so that they have an easier time going through it as well. Sort of the same thing with the universal design. We wanted it to be as easy as possible for every student who may possibly be using it. Starting this year, students will actually be able to choose their own room assignments. And so that will be helpful because as students do the special needs accommodation process, we'll then still be able to give them their choices back of here's what you've been approved for, but now you can choose where you're going to live. And I think that will really improve student satisfaction with their housing. The way it currently has worked or previously has worked, a student goes through that process and then Health and Wellness or the Counseling Center makes a recommendation to me and then we place the student in a room that meets that recommendation. I don't know that students are always happy with that, and they should have as much say in their housing as any other student.
Great. So, since our dormitories do differ in means of like how old they are and like if they have elevators or ramps, so does the Health and Wellness Center look towards those aspects as well and make recommendations?
Mm-hmm. We have a flow chart that the Housing Accommodations and Campus Accommodations Committee uses that explains what's available in each building so that they know when they're making a recommendation for a student that if you preference or tell me that a student needs to be in a single on middle, you're telling me that they have to be on the first floor essentially if they need wheelchair access. And so that walks them through, does a student need this? Yes, then these are the buildings to recommend. That also helps our students who may be looking for a special needs accommodation understand what they're looking for and what their own limitations are in terms of selecting housing. Certainly, if you need an elevator, you're limited to Nala and Deer Path or more. And so we want to make sure that students know that and are prepared for that as they go through the process.
Great. Our action project actually, after we do all of our research, we're planning on informing the deans of our school in regards to the social and cultural issues around ableism on campus and like the improvements we could have. So, do you have any improvements in mind that we could have specifically for our dormitories or anything else you have in mind?
Absolutely. I think one of the most charming things about Lake Forest is that our buildings are older, but I also think that adds some limitations to accessibility. Certainly, we've been grandfathered into much of ADA because of our age of the campus and age of buildings. As we look at renovating buildings, though, that's something we would have to keep in mind. I'd like to see more door openers in our residence halls. I think that's something that we're lacking even in buildings with elevators. You'll notice that we don't have them in every building, and certainly would be something that's helpful. I'd also like to see more ramp access. That's something that can be installed post-construction and doesn't have to be a huge renovation project. You can easily add that on to many buildings. And certainly to get to the first floor of some of our buildings would be a helpful benefit. I'd also like to look at making our lounge spaces more accessible. In particular on South Campus, our lounges are not fully accessible and difficult to maneuver. And so any improvement that we can do there would be helpful.
Great. I mean, you've been at our campus for quite a bit, and like although Lake Forest College is quite a welcoming community, at the same time, do you think that there's certain transitional aspects that students with disabilities face that they could perhaps get more help for?
Sure. I don't know that we're always great about anticipating the needs of students with physical disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so while we're able easily to place a student in a room that meets their needs, that doesn't answer the question of how is the student then going to get from Nolan to North Hall when they need to get there, and what does that transportation look like? And so I think that compartmentalized, we do a great job of addressing disabilities in the classroom and disabilities in housing and disabilities in the cafeteria or dining halls, but we don't always look at the full picture of the student experience and how we help connect the student with all of the resources and enable them to have a positive student experience.
Great. Um, what are some obstacles do you think that a student with disabilities could face culturally and socially? Because I mean, it is a college campus, and people are trying to like fit in and make their groups and have the acceptance that they aspire to attain at college. So, how do you feel about the social and cultural stigma behind ableism?
I think it's something that every college campus struggles with. I think
Mm-hmm.
on our campus, maybe we struggle with it a little bit more because not all of our programming spaces are accessible. And so when you think about places where we do large scale programs, or even like matriculation being at First Presbyterian Church, is that inclusive? Are we making an environment where it's okay for someone who doesn't have the ability to get there on their own? Like, how are we making that accommodation and still letting students feel included in the process, and like they're participating as much as any other student? In particular, I've looked at some of our orientation events and have questioned whether those are inclusive. Thinking about things like Playfair. How do you participate in Playfair if you have a physical disability, and what does that do to the rest of your college experience if you don't have that opportunity to connect? And so there are certainly always going to be ways that we can improve. And as much as it's a student issue, I also think it's a faculty and staff issue, and something that we need to be taking the lead on and looking more critically at what we offer.
Do you think that the size of a college or like private arts liberal college could have some sort of impact on like how many commodities are there for students with disabilities?
Sure, and I think it's not just the size, it's the allocation of resources. And so we're a smaller campus, we don't have as much money as an Ohio State University would. And so while we all feel strongly about this, there just isn't necessarily the funding or resource to devote to it.
Exactly, yeah. Speaking of like bigger schools, we actually went to DePaul University on last weekend, and we were looking towards like the fact that they have an entirely different center just dedicated towards the resources that students with disabilities can pursue. Do you think that somewhere down the road that could be possible for Lake Forest College?
I would hope so. I'm not sure. I don't know where that fits into the college's plans, but I would love to see something like that happen here, or even just a group of people with more expertise coming together on a regular basis to talk about what we can do, and offering feedback to other offices and departments to help them see that this isn't a hard challenge. This is something that's really easily remedied with some planning.
Great. Do you have anything else in mind that you'd like to share?
I don't think so.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much
you
for your
very
time.
Thank you.
much.